while we were doing Elephant Man, Mel Brooks came to me and the writers. He says, look, it all worked out for Elephant Man. We're moving along. This is great. Let's do something else. What do you guys want to do? And I said, well, we do have another project about this actress named Frances Farmer.
So I watched Frances.
You did. Good.
It is the kind of story that I would never seek out to watch.
Sure.
But once you're in it, you got to see it through. And what a great execution. And it happened to me, this very same thing, when because, at the PGA, we get screeners and invitations to go see screeners and Q&As with the cast and all that, right? So the Whale with Brendan Fraser, the Aronofsky film recently, is one of those things too. I would never go see that movie, and never say never, right? But like, that's not the thing I go watch.
I understand it completely. I could even talk to you about that a little bit.
But when I'm in there, I'm like, holy shit, I'm happy I saw this.
Yeah.
It's just such a great story. And that's, here, the same thing. I would, the synopsis, nothing spoke to me. But, I'm in entertainment. We've made movies. I get the whole, risings to the Marilyn Monroe type kind of story and all that. And this was just a really, I didn't even know about Frances.
Well, you make a good point. But here's one thing I would say. In my career, I would say this would only be an early movie in my career, not a late movie in my career. I'll tell you why. I mean, even Elephant Man, because Elephant Man has an ending where, I'm not giving anything away. There are no spoilers. People will see it or they won't. But the guy is going to die at the end of the thing, and he's dreaming. He wants to be like a normal person, right, which will kill him by leaning back. His neck will be, will cut off his air and he will die, and which is what happened to him in the real world. But the idea of it, I wasn't looking to make a movie at the time I didn't even think about, the end of it. The end of it is sad, but for some reason, it still caught on. People still watched it and were fascinated by it and didn't feel like they wanted to leave the movie and shoot themselves.
Now, you're talking about Elephant Man or Frances?
Elephant Man. Yeah. Now, Frances, in a way, was a similar kind of story.
Yeah.
And I got right into that right after Elephant Man. It was the next thing I did. Same writers. While we were doing Elephant Man, Mel Brooks came to me and the writers I brought the writers in, right? We were shooting in London. It was relatively early, I think, in the process, but Mel had helped raise the money. Everything was going well. Things were moving along. We were all good. David Lynch was busy every night planning what he was going to do the next day, but I had some free time, and the writers happened to be in London at the same time. So Mel said, let's all go out to dinner. So we all go out to dinner, and he's picking up the tab for a really nice dinner in London. And he says to us, look, it all worked out for Elephant Man. We're moving along. This is great. Let's do something else. What do you guys want to do? Well, I had been talking to the writers and about another project already. And it was somebody, a third party, someone else, not a friend, but somebody who knew I was making a movie, came to me with the story of Frances. And it was a fascinating story, and I didn't know. I wasn't thinking of at the time, what is my legacy? What kind of movies am I going to make? I was just thinking, I want to make another movie.
Ride this little wave here.
I'm doing a dramatic movie. Maybe I try to do another one. So the writers that I knew the best were Chris DeVore and Eric Bergman, who were the two writers for Elephant Man, and they were good friends. And I got them together, and I said, let me pitch you this story, see if you like it. And I started telling him about Frances and about her life. And I said, what do you think? And I said, well, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Let us do a little research. So I let them go and do research. I didn't tell Mel about this because it really had nothing to do with him at that point. I didn't expect anything from him beyond that one movie. I said, okay, he's going to support it. That's fantastic. Anyway, he asked us, and I said, well, we do have another project. It's called, it's about this actress named Frances Farmer. He didn't know anything about it. And the guys pitched the nature of what the story was to him. And he said, look, hey, if you guys want to do it, okay.
But it didn't hit him like elephant.
No, he says, it sounds interesting.
Okay.
That sounds interesting. I'll support, because we have a deal. We're making we have a movie. I think it's going to be really good. Let's make another movie. So they went off and they did research while I stayed in London. And they came back. And once again, they had a story. Frances was part of the story, but not the whole story.
Mm.
The story was about her and about a left-wing politician in Seattle, and the collision of these two people. And his name was Marian Zajanček, he was a not famous but well-known politician. I think he was might have been a state senator up in Seattle, and he and Frances's paths crossed. They both had kind of star-crossed lives. She went on and had her life in Hollywood. He went on and had his life in Washington, D.C., and both of them had flamed out in different ways. I mean, she basically got out of the film business. He wound up, presumably, it was said that he committed suicide. He jumped out of a window in a hotel in Seattle and died. Now, the story about him was that he was probably killed by somebody because there were a lot of people who didn't like him, and there were reasons why he might have been murdered, and it made to look like suicide.
Yeah.
Anyway, they wrote this long, involved. In fact, we weren't doing synopses then. Mel just said, "Go off and write what you want." So they went off and wrote this, and it was a book again. It was like 200 pages.
Well,
and when we got back together again, we realized that this was too much for one movie. It was way too much. And that we really had to say, okay, let's make the movie about Frances because that's where we started. And the other side of the story is literally one scene in the movie Frances about this other character, but it's not, the movie's not about him at all. And we decided to eliminate him from the story that we were telling.
It's interesting. He's kind of like, you don't want this to affect your dad's career and all that. Is that kind of the reference there?
The guy who comes up to her is working for that guy.
Yeah, so that's okay.
And you see one scene of him where he's telling, he's like a socialist and he's out there, in Seattle, and that's the
black and white.
That's the other character.
Yeah.
And he was the character. He's only in one scene. Yeah. But we decided to eliminate his story from.
So why'd you leave that part in, just to set the tone of the politics at the time?
I think it was really because it was it was really more to support the character that Sam Shepard played, who worked for the guy.
So he
then it was about the guy. We had to show who he was.
Who's falling in love with this girl? Yeah.
So he is this guy who is working for this politician, and he meets her,
the 16-year-old.
He's 16-year-old, and a 16-year-old who is being, who wrote a paper when she was in high school saying God dies, and as a result of that paper, there was a lot of negative publicity, particularly from religious groups and zealots who are saying, hey, anybody who says God dies is a non-believer and, all of that kind of stuff. But she wasn't. She wasn't any of those things. She was just looking at the world and seeing how
her own opinion
it was. Yeah. Well, it was, but in a way, the world was like it is now.
Yeah.
It's hard to look out the window and see or look in the news and you see
this is where the Reds, the commies, that's all.
Oh, but think about it. You look at you look at the news and you see people being killed and dying and all the kind of things and wars that are going on. It's hard to believe that there's a God out there that loves us.
Well, she kept saying, why would God answer my prayers for, becoming an actor and the little things I need when
let
he's
some
killing.
die.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that was the kickoff for the story.
Yeah.
And that was also where we decided to focus. So basically we sat with the writers and we focused on that aspect of the story. And again, I was very involved with the writers from an early stage in terms of shaping the narrative, trying to figure out what the story was, trying to see what other, what else had been written about Frances Farmer. All we knew, in fact, first time I ever heard about Frances Farmer, I'll tell you, was there's a well-known book, and again, this may be before your time, but it's still out there. It's a book by a independent kind of renegade independent filmmaker who made a couple of short films named Kenneth Anger. And Kenneth Anger wrote a book called Hollywood Babylon. And Hollywood Babylon,
very familiar.
It became a huge success in the 60s and 70s, I think, is when I don't know exactly when he wrote it. It might have been in the 60s. But it was a book with photographs, mostly taken from newspapers. And it was about many different Hollywood personalities who had major scandals connected to their career. Fatty Arbuckle, who was a silent comedian whose career was ruined by a party that he was at, and people thought that he had raped a girl, which it was proved that he didn't, but it didn't matter. His name was tainted, and he never worked again. There were a lot of stories.
So Frances was in that.
Frances was in that book, and her story was in it. Mainly, the parts of her story were the most salacious aspects of her life. The things that were really, her yelling "fuck you" at policemen and getting herself arrested and all of the kinds of things that happened. So that's where I first heard of her.
Now, is it before Monroe's time or around the same time, Marilyn Monroe, like that whole...
No. Marilyn Monroe was later.
It was later, right? Yeah, so this is before, so she wouldn't have been in that book yet. I was just kind of getting my time.
Marilyn Monroe, of course, would not have been in the book. Marilyn Monroe was, I don't even know when we made Frances, if she was still alive then, she might have been. But that her story obviously is also a story that could easily be in the new Hollywood Babylon too. And I think he may have written a second book that had other celebrities in it. But it was straight from there used to be a magazine called Confidential in the U.S. in the 50s and 60s, and it would have the most grotesque. It would take news photographs that were horrible and put them on the cover and have all of these stories about, and they were usually about famous people, but sometimes they weren't. So the typical headline of the Hollywood Confidential, which is very much like News of the World, some of the English papers that are really,
shock value.
The shock value. National Enquirer.
Yeah.
You know what the National Enquirer is? Yeah. Okay. Confidential was the National Enquirer before the National Enquirer. So it would they would have people make up these stories sometimes, but the headlines had to be really short and really punchy.
Yeah.
And I the one that to me was like the most, I still remember it because it was like, it just jumped out at you, was Mom Eats Tot. It was about a mother who ate her own child. But they would find short words, and that would be the story. Well, let's see what that is. So that was what the National Enquirer was, and the Frances story and Marilyn Monroe would have been in those kind of newspapers and magazines. What we wanted to do was tell her story from a different point of view and really go through how somebody gets used by the system, and how who was an innocent who never could get out of her own way, because she was a woman at a time when who said what was on her mind at a time when that was not allowed. If you did that, you'd get put in a mental hospital.
Sure.
As opposed to it now today, if the system was the same, half the people in the country would get put in would get put in mental hospitals. But that was a time when mostly a woman couldn't say a thing, couldn't say those kinds of things to power. Anybody who spoke truth to power that was a problem would get sidelined in one way or another, and that's what the movie basically goes through, that trajectory in her life.
It's an interesting, hearing you say this, that it was really 2 stories. Now I'm kind of thinking back, because it's pretty fresh in my head. I have to go back and maybe rewatch it for more, but it does, I can see that now, and I guess my observation now would be that even though maybe towards the end you do have some like traditional structure going on with kind of things getting worse and worse, and then, the unlikely enemy being a mother in the end and all that. And I'm sorry, spoiler alert to a degree, but it was made in the 80s. So, if you haven't seen it yet. But the Act 1 to Act 3 is sort of all kind of melds together in a way. There's really no inciting incident, if I'm remembering correctly, that or is there?
Well, there is. There are a number. The first inciting incident for her, the movie goes along. It's about a girl lives in Seattle. Her mother is very much supporting her career. She acts, and she's also political, and she winds up winning a trip to Russia. So that's her times, and that comes from the God dies situation.
Of course,
God dies is the beginning of what gives her notoriety as opposed to fame. And then she goes on to become an actress, and she becomes famous as an actress, but begins to realize that she's not being allowed to really reach her own potential.
So the ordinary world is really her small town life student, and then the new world is kind of the acting world that she gets into. Yeah, of course. Now it makes perfect sense. So sometimes I need to watch a movie 3 times.
No, it's quite all right. It's quite all right.
It just felt like it was a little, and not in a bad way. It just felt like it was pretty seamless. It just kind of, sometimes you can really as filmmakers, we look out for these things. Yeah. So it's about 30 minutes in. We should have something happen here. Really, right? But I don't really feel that happen. It just kind of worked. You were just kind of invested in the character, and I think a part of what had to do with that was that I was trying to. I didn't know the story, and I was trying to figure out where this is going, and I was expecting something with the politician to happen, or some lashback about the statement she made, and that was then going to be sort of the story. I didn't even know it was about an actor.
Yeah. Okay.
So it was nice going into that and being surprised and seeing it unravel.
Well, I'll tell you, it was about an actress, and it happened a long time ago. So even when it came out, a lot of people didn't know who Frances Farmer was.
What did she really get?
Well, she made a dozen movies, maybe more, I don't know, but not many more than that. She was very beautiful and smart, and her best movie and most popular movie was a movie called Come and Get It, with an American actor named Eddie Arnold, who was kind of a portly guy who was pretty famous. He was in his time period, and I'm talking about this is in the 40s, and he plays the male. He's the male lead, and she. It's not a romantic story. It's a story about her. She's in it, and she's a major character in it, and she was really good in it, and she got great reviews from it, and it should have led her to better and better roles, but she wound up, because of the fact that she was thought to be difficult.
Yeah.
And that's...
Well, that conversation with the studio head, right? He comes down, he's like, you're an actor, stop.
Yeah.
Exactly. Doing shit that actors don't do.
Well, the same thing happens today. There are certain actors out there who, because of the way they act and the outside of their work, are considered difficult, and they're hard to get work.
And now those things go viral.
Yeah, and those things happen. Even faster. But she was in that position, and she didn't support the studio in those days. They created stars. They figured out how your life was going to be. They told you who to go out with. They put you together with.
They rented your house for you.
They rented your house. They took you to premieres. They made you. They did everything. And although it still exists to a certain extent in some ways, a lot of actors, rebel against it. They don't want to. They don't want that.
But it might be a nice little moment to kind of segue into, what maybe even a lot of filmmakers don't really realize, that the studio filmmaking system, the Paramount, Columbia, the studios that started Hollywood, really, right? They were places of employment. You would go, you would clock in, you would work at Warner Brothers, you would do Warner Brothers movies, and that, there wasn't all this bouncing around, or maybe not as much. I mean,
No, there really wasn't, and you're exactly right. And I'll give you a little example of that just from a historical standpoint. I mean, there weren't any such thing as independent movies. The major studios basically had a monopoly on the means of making films. Nobody made them independently because you couldn't afford to put together all the things that they had.
And they had everything, from the lumber, the trucks, the sets, lights, everything. Yeah.
So
right.
they were the people. And not only that, but they had, they would hire actors pretty much the way a baseball team hires players. I mean, you would have a contract with the studio.
Yeah.
Just like you'd have a contract
with the on the bench, you sit on the bench.
You couldn't play for anybody else. You sat on the bench if they told you to sit on the bench, even if you were better than somebody who was on the field. And it was the same way in the business.
Were they agents or?
Yeah, they were agents, but not in the way of. The whole agency world became much more. The agents became what the studios were later. But in the earlier days, you might have an agent to help you, but essentially the studio was making the decisions. If you had a deal with Warner Brothers, they would tell you what pictures you could be in, and you didn't get a chance to just say, hey, I want to try for that one. They'd say, no, we don't think you're right for that. We think you should be in this movie. And if you wanted to be there and you were under contract to them, you had to be in the movie they told you to. The only thing you could do, if you, and this did happen in those days, if you said no, you said, I'm not going to do that, they'd say, okay, fine. And they would not let you do the things you wanted to do because you couldn't do that. You wind up being almost blacklisted, even though and ultimately when your contract ended, they let you go. Now, the other thing that happened in those days was, let's say Frances Farmer is working at Warner Brothers and MGM has a movie, and they say, oh, this would be great for her, but she has a contract with them. The MGM would come to Warner Brothers and say, we would like to loan your actor to be in our movie. Now, Warner Brothers would then say, okay, they might say, okay, maybe they'd say no. But if they said, okay, they'd say, okay, but you got to give us Humphrey Bogart. We need him for a movie of ours. Yeah. And they would trade. And that's the way actors would get to play in movies for other studios.
Interesting.
But it was the game was played at the highest levels by the people who controlled the means of production. And it was very, very hard for any actor to break out of that. And to that point, even from the earliest days in Hollywood, there were actors who wanted to rebel against that.
Douglas Fairbanks,
Charlie Chaplin. When they created United Artists, that was to go against they created their own studio.
We don't need you.
We don't need
stars.
you. We're going
to have
the
audience.
We have the power, so we're going to make our own movies.
Yeah.
Now, it didn't last that long, and it didn't. I mean, what happened was they became pretty much like the other studios. They wound up doing the same thing.
Isn't that something?
And it didn't really change much. But that was what it was, and there were a very few people who had the power to control their own destinies. Almost everybody had to be sold and bartered, and somebody else made those decisions. You didn't get to control your own career. Even now, it's difficult to control your own career, but you have a better shot at it.
You can produce
successful.
now. You can do things now. And here's the interesting thing, because if you're talking about how United Artists sort of turned into its own studio, and you have the same thing happening here where Netflix comes in and they're sort of the new way of doing things that disrupt the studio. Now they're just becoming their own studio. It sort of feels like that's just kind of the pattern.
Well, it's true. I mean, the difference is that, it isn't so much a difference in terms of the way they do business, because they're still power centers. The power centers are the ones who have the money to make the things that you want to make. So if you're an actor, nowadays, a successful actor, a name, somebody like not Frances Farmer, but Jessica Lange, and Jessica Lange goes to Netflix and says, I want to do this, they may buy it because they think she has value and they like it, and they'll do it. But again, they have control.
But it used to be, even 10 years ago, that you as an independent filmmaker, you could go sell your movie to Netflix, get a decent amount of money for it, and now it's like, we kind of, maybe, but we're doing our own stuff here. So maybe we'll pay you a fee to go produce a film if we like what you do, but then...
Well, that's one way. They have a lot of different ways of working. One way is they do their own stuff. Another way is if I bring them something and they like it, they say, okay, we'll take it. Let's say. Now, if they do that, the difference for me as an independent is they want to own the IP. They want to own the underlying project that I bring them. Now, why would I give them the project? Well, I'll tell you why. I mean, many people would say, no, I don't want them owning my, because then they control the fate of it afterwards.
Right.
Once they make it, they put the money in, they own it.
Yeah.
They have taken what's yours and turned you into an employee of them.
Right.
That's kind of a way to go.
Yeah.
But one way it might work is this. I have a $5 million movie and I want to make it. I don't have anybody who wants to fund it. I go to Netflix. Netflix says, tell you what I'll do. We like this. We think it's really good. We'll give you $7 million, but we own it. We own it. We are buying it from you, pre-buying it from you. We'll let you make it. We'll help you make it. We'll give you more than it takes to make it. So you are going to have a built-in profit. But that's all you'll ever get. There is no back end the back end is the money that they've given you over and above what your budget is. Well, if you're a filmmaker who can't get a movie made any other way,
that's a good deal.
It's not a bad deal. You say, okay, I get guaranteed profit, guaranteed company that's going to make it. That's not so bad. It looks like a good deal, but it isn't a good deal if you have a gem that you wind up selling to them. They take it, and instead of $7 million, they make $70 million,
right.
And you never get another.
You get the hangover. You make it for $5 million,
and that's it. They say, they say, hey, look, the guy who brought it to us did fine. He got money, but he doesn't get what we get. So everything
in a deal like that, because Netflix is doing theatrical releases now too.
Yes.
So you go see The Irishman in theaters, and then that sort of changes the model. But let's say you have an independent.
Not really. I'll tell you what that is. I don't mean to interrupt.
No,
but I'm just saying
the
the difference with when Netflix does a theatrical release, the theatrical release is a loss leader for them. They don't even think about it.
Okay, so
they think about it as a way to advertise their project.
Yeah,
and the money they really make, or at least what they really are interested in most, is not about how much money they're going to make on the movie. When they put it on their platform, it increases the value of their platform because more people want to subscribe. They're interested in subscribers, which is very different than being interested in just audiences.
Definitely.
And I'll give you I'll give you a little explanation about that. What I mean by that is they're looking for metrics, information. They're looking for data. The data is who are the people, not how many people. Numbers don't mean so much. It's the individuals. Who are they? Well, if you're a subscriber, they have your name, they have your number, they have everything they need to know about you. So they have a very important list of information by having subscribers. And every time they get new subscribers, they keep saying, well, now we have 1 billion subscribers. Now we have more. All of that is to sell other things beyond the movie. So the movie, again, is like it's like a pretty flag,
commercial,
pretty flag to get people to sign up.
Wasn't
that as opposed to being something on its own just to sell its own self. And it is true. That's what happens.
Kind of the pioneer of, or I would say maybe everybody, but I think Walt Disney had that thought process early on where he kind of knew that if he focused on these characters and that he could use the films as the kind of commercial, and then do the Disney land and Disney World and merchandise and
to a certain extent. But I mean, you could look at it even in a different way. What he realized was he could create something that would make you interested in watching it, and he didn't have to worry about paying actors huge salaries, and he didn't have to worry about actors becoming bigger than the studio, which was, I mean, once in the early silent days, the actors didn't even have names. You'd see a movie and it would be great. As soon as actors started saying, no, it's Charlie Chaplin, it's Harold Lloyd, it's they began to get power, because if Charlie Chaplin was in a movie, not the Tramp, the Tramp was the studio's name for it. His name was Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah.
And if he developed his own power by realizing that people wanted to see anything he was in, it gave him leverage over the company that was making it. And he could say, hey, they want me, so I need more money from you.
Yeah.
You got to pay me more if you want me.
Yeah.
I'm not just another cartoon character.
That's
whereas
Disney didn't have to deal with
that. He had cartoon characters. Mickey Mouse wasn't coming back to ask for more money for the next.
He's going to make more money. That's interesting.
But think about it. I mean, that really is a whole different. I'm not suggesting that Walt Disney did cartoons because he thought of that.
Right.
What
that was definitely
it certainly happened. It was a kind of an unintended benefit.
Yeah,
to what he was doing.
And now, as a result, I mean, what they're doing now is really smart. The long-term thinking, where these remakes of these movies like Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast, they come out almost exactly 30 years after the original, because now it's our turn to take our kids to those films, and they're just recycling that IP in a new way. And that is a brilliant thing. You can't go back and take Dustin Hoffman and do a new version of a Dustin Hoffman movie.
No, what you can do is make another version of a movie that Dustin Hoffman was in, and if the movie stood alone and worked.
Well, and what I like,
say, let's do it again. I mean, you see it all the time.
And I like the angle they're taking with things like that, where they're saying, like, for instance, Wonka as an example. I didn't see it, but I like the idea of now what happened before he became Willy Wonka and all that stuff.
Well, yes, but the thing is, when Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory originally came out, Gene Wilder played Willy Wonka, and it was a very popular movie, and it did really well.
Yeah.
Now, Gene Wilder's long gone. He's died. And you're not going to use Gene Wilder again. So you find they found Timothy Chalamet, who's extraordinarily charismatic. And I went to that movie thinking I went with my grandchildren. I went with kids, and I really thought, I'm going to this movie. I'm going to go to sleep, and my kids will watch it, but I'm not going to watch it. Well, I was sucked in immediately, and the kid was so charismatic. I really enjoyed it. I think I may have enjoyed it even more than they did.
That's how I felt about Frozen 2. I went to see it with my daughter, and I said, Frozen 2, those are all. But the depth of the script was there were so many good messages in there. I'm like, wow, this is really good script.
Well,
anyway, let's go back to Francis, because that we kind of went off on the segue. Hopefully it was an interesting one.
Yeah.
But the idea of making this movie as your second film, I just assumed it was going to be the writers who came to you and say, hey, we have another script for you. But it was actually
this one. I brought this to the writers. And honestly, I had not thought it out. The truth is, if I had thought it out in my head about my own career, I probably would have looked to find a comedy to do for the second movie, so that I didn't, because I was doing a movie. It's not The Elephant Man, but it is a period movie, and it's a sad story. And it has, it
lives in the same space.
It lives in that space. And
but you bring up an interesting thing, because there are two schools of thought, right? On one hand, to secure consistency in your career, it does behoove you to stay in a lane, like Mel Brooks. Do comedy. So why do you think that maybe a different type of film would have been better in terms of that? Because it did kind of. There was momentum going. It was easier for you to make that movie, probably, because...
Well, it was, because the companies that got behind it were the same companies in the main that were involved in the first movie. So they also, it was EMI, which was the studio that basically put up half the money for Elephant Man. It was the foreign half, but they came and they also said, "Hey, what's next? What do you have?" Because they didn't expect Elephant Man to be a hit, and it was a huge hit for them. Foreign, they made a ton of money. Foreign, and they had the year that we made Elephant Man for EMI, not Paramount, which was the domestic distributor, but EMI, which was the foreign distributor. They had, I think, 5 other movies. One of them was Honky Tonk Freeway. One of them was something called Times Square. One of them was a movie with Neil Diamond about Al Jolson. It was he plays a cantor, and not a single one of them. Elephant Man was the least. That was like their last choice of films, but they put it in their package of movies for the year. It did better than all their other movies. So all of a sudden they said, "Oh," they didn't know. It just happened. So they came back to me and to Mel, and they said, "Let's do another movie." So we wound up giving them Francis, and they did it.
So why do you think you would have maybe done something different?
I only mean that from a career standpoint.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get pigeonholed into doing one thing. And I'll tell you, it did affect me, because after doing Francis and The Elephant Man, I wound up getting a deal at a studio at Warner Brothers. They gave me an overall deal to do movies there, to develop movies there. They never said that they would guarantee that they would make any of them, but they would, but they'd seen what I had done, and they said, "Okay, we'd like to have a deal with you." And they made a deal with me for 2 years, I think it was. And they paid me some, not what they'd pay me to make a movie, but they paid me, gave me an office, all of those things. The first thing I brought them was a comedy. And it was a comedy with 2 well-known comic actors at the time. It was Danny DeVito was one of them, and Christopher Lloyd was the other. And the 2 of them had both been in the series Taxi. And this was a project that was not Taxi, but it was a comedy. And I took it to Warner Brothers, and they liked it. They said, "Yeah, we like it, but not for you." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, you make, dramatic, really important kinds of stories. This is a little comedy. Somebody else should be doing this. This is not your." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. I like all kinds of movies. I've worked with Mel. I like, High Anxiety and things like that, But it was hard for me. What you find out is that what makes you successful also kind of pigeonholes you in a way. And you've got to figure out, wait, I don't want to just do that. I want to do other things, It didn't necessarily have to be a comedy, but I didn't want to do
I hear you.
sad movies that were sad.
Very similar.
It's like right now in my career, I don't think I want to make a movie that doesn't have a hopeful ending. It's just too, it's too late in my life that I want to make movies where you walk out of the movie and you want to kill yourself.
Yeah, I thought Jessica Francis was gonna die in the end. I expected that, and in some ways, it's almost worse what happened.
Yeah. In a way, it is.
Because
I agree with you. On the one hand, it's a movie that moves me, and Elephant Man is a movie that moves me. And my feeling about being a producer in movies was I always wanted to make movies that moved you. When I say that, I don't only mean move you to tears, move you to laugh,
but
move you somewhere. Don't just leave you flat.
Yeah.
So Elephant Man could move you to tears. Francis could also move you to tears, and certainly anger, but it would catch in your, it's soul.
I found myself going,
soulful,
shut up, Francis, stop digging your hole. Like you could just pretend long enough to get out of this.
Well, you would hope that, but unfortunately, to me, what the movie was representing was that for her to be authentic to herself, she had to be inauthentic to herself in order to survive, and she couldn't. And that was one of the things that took her away from when I say survive, I don't mean survive physically,
but as a
being, but as an artist,
right? Yeah,
as an artist, she couldn't survive unless she was willing to play ball, and she didn't want to play ball. That was, nowadays you got actors who don't play ball. They play their own game. And you, if you're the financier and they know you're getting an audience, will find a way to get them. They'll get financed.
How did was Eisner still running Paramount?
At the end, Francis wasn't released by Paramount.
Also, that was going to be my question, because the studio in the picture is Paramount.
Yeah, but it wasn't Paramount.
So how did Paramount feel about being the studio that actually was
I never asked them.
There weren't any legal repercussions?
No, there weren't any legal repercussions.
Did you have to get a permit to shoot the sign and everything?
Oh, we did. But it was just a permit. We're saying, hey, we're making a movie. Okay. Would you, what do we do? He said, we let movies work.
We didn't explain what the...
We didn't really... It's interesting that you say that, but we didn't think of asking them for permission to allow us to... I mean, we asked permission to use the movie, but we never... There was nothing... They didn't ask, as they might today, they didn't ask, well, we got to read the script and see how you portray Paramount. We said, no, we don't really portray Paramount. I mean, essentially, we were saying, this is our studio executive's kind of a made-up executive, and he embodies studio executives of that time. But
so was it a conscious choice to show Paramount? Because he could have just as well just left the name out and...
No, it was, I don't know. I think it was a conscious choice for authenticity to show a studio. It didn't have to be Paramount. It could have been any studio.
Yeah.
It just happened that we were, we shot a lot of it on the lot at Paramount. And we, having just made a movie for Paramount, we had a good relationship with them. So even though they didn't pay for it. In fact, they were paid to let us shoot on their lot. They didn't. We never had an issue with them, and nobody from their legal department came and said, "Wait, you made Paramount look bad." We weren't trying to make Paramount look bad. Sure. We were trying to make the point that studio executives, not just this one executive, but studio executives in general, had a certain way of operating, and they felt that they were the kings of their domain, and they basically made the decisions for the actors.
And you didn't depict them in some horrible way. I mean, I think it was very accurate. It just, especially the reason I asked if Michael Eisner was still running Paramount is because when he went to Disney, I mean, Disney is known to be extremely careful with their name and what gets said and how they get depicted. And so I just assumed, that's a big...
You're right.
Thing for somebody.
To tell you the truth, he probably was. I'm not sure because I don't remember exactly where he was at the time. But when we went to Paramount, we, as you say, we weren't trying to show anybody as being different than people might have been in that time.
Yeah, he wasn't like a scumbag trying to molest her.
Yeah, he wasn't.
He was just a dick executive.
He was
power hungry.
I mean, if you were making a movie about things that happened in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and a studio executive didn't put his arm around an actress and say, "Darling," whatever, you'd think, well, that's not real. Even though if somebody does it today, you think, okay, this is a Me Too problem.
Yeah.
This is a guy who should be, Yeah. So we weren't thinking about that at that time at all. We didn't think that we have to show him in some sanitized way. We wanted to show what a studio executive might actually say to an actor who was trying to defend her very unique position of she wanted to be stronger than the studio. They said, "Darling, we'll take care of you." That's what we do.
Yeah.
We take care of you. We tell you what shows to be in. Don't make waves. She was not that actress. Yeah. She didn't want to do that.
Yeah, she had her a certain way she wanted to be, and I mean it's really her right to be that way. But it didn't fit into that structure system, and honestly, it doesn't really fit in a lot of hierarchical situations even now. And it's not. I'm not even saying that one or the other's right or wrong, but I do feel like there tend to be, healthy boundaries, and there tend to be moments where people overstep them, not because you're, getting your place dog, but it's more there are people who are tasked with the oversight and the big picture. And I say this to a lot of actors that I coach too, and it's not that maybe the director or the producer don't want to necessarily entertain a good idea that you might have, but also consider that, when you're so laser focused on your part, do your part as best as you can. The director's job is to have the creative vision for it, and he might know things that you're not thinking about that are out of context, that you're not shooting right now. But
Totally agree. Yeah. I agree with you. But one of the things that Francis shows, which is probably, and it's supported by research. So we looked into what happened in those days, and if an actor behaved badly and made life difficult for a company, the company would find ways to punish them, and they would be punished.
They go out of their way to.
They'd go out of their way to punish them. So we have a scene where the studio executive basically has told the director, if she's going to fall in the mud, make her do 6 takes instead of 2, because we want her to know. It's basically
know your place.
We're going to make her know her place, and the only way she's going to know her place is by being punished.
Yeah,
and so they would do it.
So they set her up with the reporter, and they start slandering her in the newspaper,
right?
And then they start making her drop in the mud over and over. Yeah. So there's a bit of a malicious.
Well, that's
side.
We believe now. Again, we're not dealing with fact in the sense that we have chapters that talk about that in some way, but we do know that things like that happened, and actors talked about them, and in the biographies of other actors you've read, you heard that they did those things, so that we were trying to be truthful in that way. The funny thing about the movie is that when the movie came out, it wound up being very, very popular in a lot of in foreign countries. I find if I go to France, more people will talk, they know who I am, and they know I made Francis. They know that movie, and they say, "Oh, I know you made Elephant Man, but Francis, that's the movie."
They like dark endings,
they do.
Don't they?
They do.
Yeah,
they do. So it was. I found that out a lot in Europe, that I had in France, and Italy, and Spain. That movie was very, very well received.
It makes sense. It's not a Hollywood-y film in a sense of the American film that was, when you look at, MGM pictures and stuff and big American endings and all that. How did you get to, because I asked you this earlier, but, you had Dustin Hoffman that you almost considered for The Elephant Man, decided it wasn't the right choice. And if you guys want to check out the last episode, we talk about that there. Dustin Hoffman and Jessica Lange actually end up doing Tootsie right after you finish this picture. You told me there is no
connection.
No connection. So how did you get to Jessica? Why her?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. And first of all, we should mention the director of the movie's name is Graham Clifford. Graham is from Australia. Graham had not directed. Again, he was pretty much a first time.
You have a habit of doing that.
Well, I like working with. It's not that here's where I come from. If I'm going to be a producer, I want to have a connection. If I'm working with a producer who's very powerful, a director who's extremely powerful, who doesn't want to hear what I have to say, hey, that could happen. But it's not good for me.
Yeah.
I want to work with directors who are interested in my input, who I can be very much part of the scene.
I respect that.
And as a result, it just seems to have worked out that I've worked with a lot of early directors. It doesn't always have to be a first-time director.
Yeah.
Most of the directors I've worked with have done other film work, but they may not have done a major feature.
Yeah.
Graham hadn't done a major feature, but he'd done other things. He'd done a lot, and he was a major film editor.
Yeah.
He had now
that's important.
The way I knew, and he'd edited some amazing films. He edited Don't Look Now, I think, which was a Nicholas Roeg film with Julie Christie, and it was an amazing movie. He did The Man Who Fell to Earth. He was the editor of that. He was the editor of the movie that got him to me was the movie The Postman Always Rings Twice, which was with Jessica Lange. Now, at the time, Jessica had only done, before she shot Postman, she had only done a small comedy called How to Beat the High Cost of Living, and another movie, King Khan, where she was hired in both of those because of her beauty, not her looks, more than her acting chops. And yet, when she did Postman, that was definitely for her acting. I mean, her looks were important, but her acting was critical because she was going to be playing opposite Jack Nicholson, who was as big a star as you could have. She was brand new at that. Well, the movie hadn't come out. I was meeting with Graham, who heard that I was doing a movie about Frances Farmer, and he knew a little bit about her. And he contacted me, and he said, I'd love to direct this movie. I said, well, I'm talking to a lot of directors, so I didn't, he says, well, whether or not you hire me as a director, I think I know the person who should play the lead. Now, at the time, I was meeting, I'll tell you some of the names. Kathleen Turner had just been in Body Heat, and she was a possible choice. Another, I'm trying to think of some of the other actors, but there were some, Sissy Spacek, who I knew through a connection through David Lynch, actually. Some other actresses who might have played Kim Basinger, for example. Kim Basinger was just starting out, but she was unbelievably beautiful. I mean, and she actually called me up, and I met with her in my office, and I'm telling you, she was knockout gorgeous. And I thought, oh my God, I don't know if she can act, but boy, she's amazing looking. And she also knew about Frances Farmer, and she had said her background was somewhat troubled, and she could understand Frances. So I met with a lot of different people in those early days. Graham came to me and he said, look, I don't know if you know Jessica Lange, but she's the right person to do this. So I said, well, I said, I know she did King Khan, and, I said, I don't know.
I know she can be held by a gorilla,
but I don't, how would I know? He said, well, come to my cutting room. So I came to his cutting room, and he showed me scenes that she was doing on Postman.
Yep.
And wow,
that was it.
I said, holy Christ, she's beautiful and she's terrific. She's really a good actress. So I arranged to meet with her, and I had a meeting with her, and I went back after meeting with her again. Remember, Mel Brooks was backing the project.
Mm-hmm.
This is, before any studio got involved. And I told Mel, and I said, wow, I saw this woman. She's really spectacular, and she's beautiful, and she's smart, and the meeting I had with her really convinced me that she was a very, very bright, capable woman. Now I knew she could act, and she looked right, and all of those things. So we started to think about the possibility of hiring her, and knowing that she had a Postman would be coming out, we thought, well, Postman's going to be a big movie, so her name is going to be. We'll take that momentum, and that was kind of how we got Jessica.
That's smart. So it was a bit of a business choice too.
But it was a choice. She and the editor, who ultimately did become the director, he was the one who introduced us to her.
Is it because he introduced her that you made him the director in a sense? Not like the only thing, but
no,
that kind of...
No. But I think it made me recognize that he had very good taste.
Yeah.
That's one thing I knew, because he was the first person to mention her, and no one would have thought of her at the time. They were all looking at big actresses, actresses who had already made it, who were already, stars.
Isn't that something? Yeah, I talk to so many actors, and it's like, how do you get the good jobs and stuff? It's like, have an editor recommend you to a producer. These things happen in such weird ways.
Yeah, but you can't. That's the one thing. The one thing is, you can't ever. There is no one way.
Yeah.
Everything that's happened to me in my entire career has happened through a series of happy accidents.
Yeah.
Or not so happy accidents.
Well, but my theory is you have a plan, you have a target on the wall, and you go for it. You do the things that you should be doing.
Right.
You network in the right direction. You try and you do what you can, maybe even self-produce a little bit and stuff. But then when you're on that train and you're building that momentum and you're moving in that direction, it sort of creates this energy around you that suddenly people see where you're going and what's happening. And, there's some universal alignment that suddenly a guy you met 4 years ago calls you up and those things start falling in place. But, if you just kind of run around frazzled and begging everybody for anything and everything, you don't end up having those things that happen because you're not really invested in a certain direction. So nobody can jump on your train. But if you do that, it's not going to work out the way you planned, but something will happen where you'll still end up somewhere good.
Well, no, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think, as we said in the last, the last hour that we were doing the podcast on Elephant Man, when we did that one, we talked about the fact that the script came from my babysitter who got it from her boyfriend. Unusual circumstances, certainly, and that was, a completely sideways way to get a script. I wouldn't suggest people go to their babysitters and ask for their boyfriend's script. I wouldn't, or their own script. But that just happened. That was the way it happened. With Frances, in a strong way, Jessica was the key to the whole movie. If her performance didn't work, the movie didn't work. There's nobody else.
She was the makeup in Elephant Man.
Yes. The makeup and the Elephant Man had two major actors. You had Anthony Hopkins, who was a great actor. You had John Hurt, who was.
But what I mean is, if the makeup wouldn't have worked, the movie
wouldn't have worked.
Right.
And without Jessica Lange, I'm not saying another actress couldn't have played her, but I don't think you would have gotten the kind of performance you got. And she was perfect.
She was.
And that made the movie, and it came from somebody who was auditioning for me to be the director of the movie. It gave me a sense of him. I'd seen other stuff he'd done. I'd seen the editing he'd done. I thought, okay, this is a guy who has a lot to gain and a lot to lose.
Yeah.
And that's always a good place to be.
I love editor-directors, writer-directors too, but I'm an editor, and I know that I'm only somewhat nominally decent at directing because I started with editing. Because you need to take all the mess of all the footage and put a story together.
Okay, I agree with you, and I think editors can very often be very good directors. I would say this though, and this is just a general comment to the audience that's interested in that process and thinks that, one of the things you think about with an editor is an editor has made all the choices after the chaos of shooting. So you've shot tons and tons of footage, and the editor's got to bring it down to make it focused, okay? Well, some people might think because of that, someone who comes out of editing will already know what choices to make and what choices not to make because they're editing. What I found out, again, this is anecdotal evidence based on one opportunity, having worked with Graham, who I love. Graham is a great friend of mine, and we could bring him in here. He'd be happy to come in and do a talk with us. He's great. He's a great guy, and he teaches film, and he's a really, really, really excellent guy. But the truth is, I realized after a while that an editor is somebody who wants every choice, not a less choice.
So they do the Cameron thing where you would have too much coverage.
He would shoot every scene from every possible angle because. And I would say, Graham, we only have 10 hours.
Yeah, we need options.
I can't let you keep going. So I had to kind of rein him in a little bit.
Yeah.
But he was so completely tied to the making of this film that he would call me at 2 a.m, at 4 a.m, he'd have an idea, and I'd say, Graham, I'm sleeping. Yeah. Call me at 7.
Right.
I'll meet you at the studio. But no, he was so full of energy and ideas because he was directing the piece that I would go through his lists of coverage and I'd say, wow, that's great. Can we eliminate any shots? Because he wanted everything.
Work with me here.
And he had an editor. He didn't, which I think is smart. And even editors who become directors need to have editors.
Don't get in the weeds too.
You want to have someone else look at the same footage because it's too insular if you do it all yourself.
I agree with that.
But to bring somebody else in to help you to, because the one thing that the editor, and I would say this, again, maybe we're getting too much in the weeds, but I will say this about an editor. An editor doesn't know how hard it was to get that shot and doesn't care.
Right.
If it doesn't work, it doesn't matter.
You
may say, "Oh my God, I got to hold that." It took me 6 days to get that.
I've been there. There's no way in hell I'm not
using that shot. And somebody says, "You don't need that shot."
not right for the movie.
Forget
it worked. Cut
Throw it away.
Yeah.
And an editor can tell you that, but you still have something emotionally invested because it took you so long to get it.
That's true. I think, there's this story about Apocalypse Now. Coppola had to cut like a 20-minute freaking dinner scene that he loved, but it was not right for the movie. It was too much. So
all of that is true.
That's interesting insight. Okay. This time goes by quick.
Sure does.
There's a lot more we could talk about, but maybe we'll save it
we'll
for
get
the next
to it
one.
for other things. I think one of the things we can do as we go forward in this podcast is that, I'm giving you some specifics about individual movies, which we can start with, but we can, in further podcasts when we're talking about other movies, not necessarily movies that I've made, we can maybe refer to stuff that we have talked about previously and use that as a way into other movies.
Yeah, especially when we talk about the pornos that you shot.
Yeah, all the pornos that I didn't make.
Right, the neighbors.
Yeah,
the neighbors.
Only the ones I was in.
Right, exactly. All right. Is that it? Any finishing thoughts, or that's it?
No, I think this has been good, and I think it's opened up some good possibilities for future discussions.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
There were a lot of things that happened as a result of the pandemic that I contend were kind of unintended positive consequences. Our cameraman and our designer and our director could spend a full day or two at each location and plan out every shot and figure out what they were going to do
super helpful.
way in advance of
great.
shooting.